Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Two Wizards and a Mic, where two really old people, because we're 150 apiece, and we are just still going. We talk about D&D, and we hope that we instill wisdom into your brains in order to make the game more fun. So, I am Shane.
And I am Andrew.
And this week, of course, I want to remind everybody that this show is brought to you by Cawood Publishing at worldofmere.com. I always try to make that sound dramatic. But, Andrew, tell me, you have some updates about the latest, not the latest, but the previous Kickstarter, but also the most updated one? Yes, maybe so?
Yes, so Monsters of Feyland 2 Kickstarter, we're close to 80% of the shipments either on their way or they've arrived.
Cool.
And there's still a few of the single books to be mailed. Most of the shipments to go are the larger ones, although we did get some of those out last week. And yeah, the larger ones and some of the overseas ones, they might only get mailed late. The month ends this week, so some of those might only mail out in April, and then hopefully the new Kickstarter, Monsters of the Dungeon, will launch mid-April, maybe late April. We're working on that still right now. The art is almost finished for that.
That excites me because I have money and please take it. Uh, because, Kickstarters are awesome. Well, your Kickstarters are awesome. I can't speak for every Kickstarter.
Well,
But,
this time we'll probably have our largest book yet. We might have the most monsters in this book if we get some of the stretch goals. We will have more action shots than ever before with the art, and we will have more lower and mid-level monsters than before. And yeah, I'm really excited. I'm having the most fun making this book, actually, because in the dungeon it gives you a lot of room to create. The Feywild did as well, Feyland, but the dungeon, a lot of strange creatures can get in there, especially through portals. So yeah, I'm having a lot of fun trying to figure out different ways different creatures could get into the dungeon and how they would move around. And we're going to have 7 different kinds of dungeons as well, and the book will be divided into those 7 kinds of dungeons.
that is kind of like what you've done with the other books with like the whole well, actually, one of the things we're talking about today about the
Exactly.
different parts of the city, different parts of basically what I call them biomes. Like if I'm going to go to a place, to me it's a biome because that's the language that's used in a lot of video games.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean that's what
definitely the
that's just
wilderness book would be like, we called them regions, but it would be like a biome and then the city one we call districts. This dungeon book, like there's going to be an arcane dungeon part of the book, and then there'll be like a castle dungeon area, and then yeah, I think it'll be really, really convenient for DMs to use, and we'll give you some really cool creatures.
well, I'm excited. But today, this episode, we're dedicating to cities. Hence the book. Oh, I always do that. Hence that book right there. Um, where when you have your party journeying through the wilderness, that's kind of great. But sometimes you have to go to civilization, and there are these places called cities. Do we include towns in our definition of city?
Yeah, today we'll briefly mention villages and towns. Kind of, there's really 3 basic tiers for the most part, and
Okay.
we'll talk about that. But overall, it's about settlements, and then the villages and towns are pretty simple to create, and a town is just like a smaller version of the city.
Right. Right. Which reminds me, you sent me something cool about the populations of
Mhm.
cities and how those actually work in D&D. The medieval demographics made easy. So anyway, but let's start off.
Sure.
In D&D, what is a city?
All right. Well, like you said, the reason why in Dungeons and Dragons they're important is because eventually the party will need food and rest, and these things could get them in the wilderness, but or in the rural areas, but um, likely in most campaigns you'll end up in some kind of settlement because they need food, they need to rest somewhere, they need supplies. That's a big one. You're not going to find that too much of that in the wilderness. They might need mounts that they couldn't get in other places. And as for the dungeon master and for the story, there's information they could get in the city and rumors. So, as you talked about, there are basically three tiers. Villages are in medieval times, that's what we're talking about today, because of traditional Dungeons and Dragons.
Of
Villages
course,
are
you have
really,
to.
yeah, villages are really up to 1,000, and most of the time just a few hundred people. Towns, maybe up to 10,000 max, but usually, 2 or 3,000, 5,000 would kind of be a reasonable, actually, that would even be a bigger town. 10,000 would be a huge town. And then cities, really anything above that. So 10,000 max, again, in the medieval world, I would say is 100,000. And that would be extremely rare. Most cities would be 10,000 to 50,000. And we'll look at a bit again. We'll look a bit at the Monsters of the City book that we made, because not only is it a monsters book, but it's really a campaign book for you to have settlements, and we give you resources in there. So basically, there's some really simple things that it helps to have sketched out for your settlements. The first would be the location. So this could be by an ocean or a river, in a forest, on a mountain, in the frozen land wastes of the world, in a desert. You'll need some kind of history, some kind of origin, like how was this created? Was it a fishing village? Was it a trading post? Did it originally start out as a fort or a keep? Was it because the land was really good for farming? And a very, very important thing is water. So you have to have a consistent supply for thousands
Yeah.
of people. If you have a city, even a village, you'll need water for sustenance, and then also transport and fishing. These are all very important. And farms. So the amount of farmland that you would need is actually quite substantial. So the one document that Shane was talking about, this one person has looked at it in detail, and he said really it takes about a square mile of cultivated land to support around 200 people. So if you have a city of 100,000 or 50,000 or 20,000 people, that is an enormous area that you will need of farmland or access to fishing, and you're not going to be able to feed everybody with fish either. So it's a huge area. So anytime I have a city or a large town, I have massive amount of farmland nearby, and you have to have that for people to survive. The other really basic thing is protection. How would this place keep out wild animals? So any kind of settlement, even a small village, is going to have some kind of wall. A very big city, a wealthier city might have a big stone wall or several walls. You also need a guard force to protect the city and to basically run the city. Um, you'll need a prison and laws. The type of government, so in medieval times, there's lots of monarchies. Democracies would be rare, but that's a possibility. Dictatorships, you could have a council of elders, either elected or appointed. And then a magocracy is one that's run by wizards. You could also have one town run by the clergy. And there's many kinds of governments. So that's just a small example. Um, to help make it realistic, it helps to look at what would the economy be here. So, you're talking about fishing again is a big one, forestry, mining, farming, It could even be having big markets in the city, having hirelings that you could buy in the city. It could be, unfortunately, slavery that a lot of money is being made with. Um, then you'll look at worship. How many temples would you have? Like a village, you're not going to have a temple. You might have a shrine. A town, you might have one temple or two. Only in a big city might you have a few temples. Then looking at magic, if magic plays a big role, that's going to affect the city as well. A simple thing is if there's a ton of magic in your world, the city guard or the ruling authority might have some magic users as part of their guard troops. Um, that sort of idea. So, looking again at our book, this Monsters of the City, we basically divided this book up into 7 districts, and this wouldn't really be for a village. If it was the village, I would just take probably one tiny part of one of these districts, and that would be the village for the most part. And then a town would have smaller versions of these. So we basically divided up into the castle. So the people who rule the city, the king, the queen, dukes and princes and princesses, and all their retainers and their knights. Um, if the city was run by mages, a wizard council or something, then maybe this area is controlled by wizards. Then you have the wealthy. So this is like the nobility, the guild owners, very, very wealthy merchants. It's sort of like the nouveau riche in a way. Um,
Right.
and it's not people who have just got their power through their family or through some sort of legacy like that, but these are people who've they might still have good contacts and they might have still risen because of their family's influence, but there also can be people who actually made it in the world and worked their way up. Then you have the temple area, and it doesn't just have to be clergy, it could also be monks or maybe even mystics could be part of that area. Then you have the docks. So this would be, it could be by a river, by an ocean, by a lake. And this is a place where you could have some interesting visitors arrive in the city as well. Then the market area. So this would be the heavily populated by stores and maybe big open air markets. And then we have the slums. So for a village, I would probably just take part of the slum area and make that could even be a village. And that's the poorest area of the city, probably the biggest area in the city. And then the sewer area would be the underground area of the city, which
Right.
would be the most barren. Like you're not going to have too many services down there. Probably the Thieves Guild will operate in that area, maybe some cults.
I was already thinking of Skyrim and
Yeah,
like the how the towns are kind of laid out, and of course you want to go. You're either, if you remember the Thieves Guild, you're going to the sewer. You're going to the graveyard, which generally connects to the sewer. So there's
yeah.
all kinds of cool things like that that are tropes that I just kind of love.
Yeah, so one way again to build each town or city with these districts at the beginning of each section. So this is the castle district section. And what we have here is a list of encounters. And these are from the core monster manual, these ones. So the kind of things that you might run into in the castle area. And then we have the authority. So who would basically be the authorities in that area? Probably knights, royal knights, um, maybe wizard councils, elected councils, potentially. Then there's a section for factions. So in the castle area, knighthoods, um, guilds, again, the councils, that sort of thing. Then landmarks. What could you find in that part of the city or town? Well, obviously castles, fortresses, but also some very large manors, gatehouses, barracks, but then also gardens. Like these people are going to want to live in a beautiful environment and they can afford it. So there's going to be gardens. There might be some very expensive taverns and inns, and some very expensive stores. There's going to be stables for their mounts. Then we have a section on what kind of stores would be in each area. And then inns and taverns, what quality? In the player's handbook, there's basically 5 levels of quality, I believe, and starts at aristocratic and goes down to like really poor quality. So here you can guess for the castle district, we made it the easy for me to say,
Aristocrat?
aristocratic quality. So
Right.
we've listed the quality that you might have in terms of the services. And then the last part is specific services in the area, like coaches, messengers, and in other parts of the city, there's hirelings, whether they're trained or untrained, and all of these things are in the player's handbook. But we put it all together in one place in this book, so you could either use this for towns, cities, or like I said, I would just take one part maybe of the slum area and then maybe add a little bits of the others, and you'll have a village.
Yeah, one of the things that I've played with are a few of these different online generators, where you can basically generate a map of a town.
Right.
And I normally would generate them without any text on them, like without any sort of suggestions as to what area is what. Um, and then you get to kind of play with it. You know, like, okay, well, hey, this looks really cool. This could be this area. This could be that area. Like, there's
Mhm.
all kinds of cool little odds and ends like that. That for the people who like to build visually. But of
Right.
course, at the end of the day, a pen, a pencil, a blank piece of paper that works just as well. And honestly, some of them I think just look great when they're done that way as well.
Yeah.
You've got some really cool little intricacies for how people draw stuff, and sometimes you need to guess, what is that thing? Oh, that looks interesting. Why is that there? I don't even know.
Mhm.
And it turns out to be, their mom's house or something. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, good point. Like I was going to mention that. So the dungeon master, you want to have a basic map. The village is going to be again fairly simple, town a little more complex, and then a city could get quite complex. But I would just have the things that you need. Um, one of the good things in this document, it goes through different services and how many people it would serve. So, for example, a baker would serve around 800 people. So imagine how many bakers you would need in a city of 50,000 or 100,000 people. Again, you know, you got to consider that a lot of the poor class, wouldn't have access to some of these services, but there would be, there could be hundreds of bakers. So you're obviously never going to use that in a game, even if you played for 30 years or something. So, you know, I would just make what you need. And so we'll get into that now with important NPCs, but you'll want to make a map of some kind. And if it is more detailed, you could always photocopy it or make copies for your players. That's pretty fun to have. Maybe they can buy the map when they're in the settlement. So important NPCs. So these you'll have to sketch out as well. So obviously the ruler, which could go from the king in a city to maybe it's just a chief of the town, which is sort of like the mayor in a town or a village. Um, then the nobles, some important nobles, maybe the person in charge of the guards, and then the priests in the town, if there's any like wizards of any kind of import, bards, merchants, any of the wealthy merchants, and then some other guild leaders. So I would only do, again, the things that you need. So you're not going to need tons and tons of these characters. I would just have a handful of them, bards, maybe two or three, merchants, wealthy merchants again, probably less than half a dozen, priests, less than half a dozen. You don't need too many. You don't need to go overboard. Um, and having these sketched out helps a lot. And then importantly, having a list of names of other characters like guards that the players might suddenly say, "Oh, what's your name?" So I've mentioned before the last thing I do when I DM every time is I write down a list of, usually half a dozen male names and half a dozen female names. And those are for random characters who might enter the story for different reasons. But for world building to create these villages, towns, or cities, you don't need to have tons of these NPCs, but you'll want to have a few of them. Um, you want to make sure that this is a place that's alive. So the way that you can do that is that the party finds out that things are happening even when they're not there. So this is always a good thing to do. So either upon a return visit to the settlement, they find out certain things have happened, or while they're away, they hear about things that are happening in this settlement. And that helps them to have this feeling of, oh, this world actually, like, it makes sense, and there's actually things going on even when we're not right there. For example, say a party is dealing with a thieves guild, and maybe they end up killing off a couple of them that they run into. Maybe they don't get the whole guild. Maybe they think they've taken care of the guild, but they haven't. And while they're away, there's consequences because of what they've done. So a really big thing in the game is consequences all the time. If they've arrived in a new settlement and they upset a guard, or they upset the mayor or the ruler, another ruler like a king or queen, there should be consequences. Maybe they mouth off at a wealthy merchant. Well, maybe he's connected to the Thieves Guild, or maybe he's, good friends with the queen. So it's always good to have these consequences for interacting with the environment.
I was just thinking about, oh yeah, yeah. So you're all gonna have a short rest, or sorry, a long rest now in this inn. It's very comfortable. It's a nice. The rooms are gorgeous. You all go to sleep, and you wake up in the morning, and all your stuff is gone because the local thieves guild was paid off by the person who you pissed off yesterday. Oh yeah, I love that stuff. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a really important element. Another way that you can do that, which I call these, now I'm kind of naming it the Lucas elements. This is what George Lucas does really well. So he has these good little random, they seem random, elements in his stories that make the world come to life. So it's not just that there are things that happen because of the party's action, there's consequences, but there's also things that can happen around the party that just add to the flavor and bring the world to life as well. A simple thing that I've done a few times is the party, many times they visit a tavern or an inn. So a simple thing I've had is that somebody comes in and out of the inn. So the party's in there having dinner, or maybe talking to the barkeep, or hearing about a rumor from the barmaid. And I'll say, oh, just then you notice a large rat runs through the front door and under some of the chairs, heading towards the back of the tavern. So you could think, oh, what does this rat have to do with the story? And there could be something to do with the story, but it's just a nice little feature that adds realism, and that the party remembered that people are coming in and out. Another, you could just say a trio of guards enter. They put down their weapons by the door and they walk over to buy some tankards of mead. So little details like that. Maybe the barmaid gets upset at the cook and they start having a yelling, they have this screaming match at each other, right? Just those little pieces help add a realism to the world, as well as having some definition in the menu. Um,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to go into great detail, but if you just have the barkeep or barmaid come up and say, today's specials are wild boar, and we've got a meat pie that was just cooked. So, just adding that little flavor, like maybe there's a mead that's made in the next town and it's supposed to be really good quality, and the party decides to try that. So all those little details, I know Lucas in Star Wars, in the original Star Wars, was so good at adding those little pieces that help the world, feel like. An example is he often had robots on the spaceships going down the hallways, and it doesn't have to
Yeah.
do with the story in terms of the plot involving the main characters, but it adds to the realism and the tone and the connections to the world.
It's like a the little grains that you can drop in. Like the rat is actually a perfect example of, because people always are going to assume when they're playing that the characters that they see in the room or they see on the street might be connected to what's going on. But then, of course, they could just be background characters
Hmm.
living their lives in whatever D&D world it might be. And but the other thing, like the rat, is like one of those eye-catching things where it's like, you notice this happening. And as you said, it could mean something, it might not. And you could
Hmm.
just run and it runs into the kitchen and you go after it thinking it's somehow really
Hmm.
important. And it turns out that no, it's like a pet rat, or it just disappears, it vanishes. Like it gets under something and you don't know where it went.
Yeah.
Yeah. The realism, yeah. I love it.
Yeah, another one is a merchant who's just really, really friendly with the party, and then, if they do engage with him, then I often have that person drop a little bit of information, you know? And so again, it helps tie the party back to the world again. And, a town crier is a really good one I use sometimes, who's telling the news of the day, and you learn, oh, there's a protest against the queen. Why is there a protest? Who's upset? That oh, she's raised the toll to come into the city, and then who's upset? Well, the people who live outside the city who come into the markets. So, and then you find out there's more going on. Like, that's just a small part of what this queen is doing. So, yeah, I really like having those parts to it, and it's natural storytelling. It's what storytellers do, and I like that part of the game, and I can tell that it does mean something. Like, you talk about the weather, you talk about the smells on the street or the smells in the tavern, um, the music that's being played. I think it all helps to add those elements. Another feature which I like is to make the world balanced so that the party is not always in danger. So there are going to be places where it is more dangerous. Like there's a city in the world of Mir. There's two cities controlled by vampires. So those are extremely dangerous places to go. But there are also cities where, for the most part, it's fairly peaceful. There's still thugs there in the streets. There's still thieves guild. Um, there's still some evil nobles, but there are also helpful people. There's people who worship good gods with clerics who will and priests who will be helpful. There's merchants who aren't evil and out to exploit people. There are people working against evil. Maybe the city guard are trying to deal with a slaver group. So I like to have that balance so that the party has a break from, because I do like to have a lot of combat and lots of action, but I like to balance it out by giving the players a break. And I like to have the world have places that are civilized, that they know that we're probably going to go here and be okay for a while. Like we should be able to get a night's sleep. We should be able to buy some supplies, and we should be able to leave safely. So I like to have a certain amount of that, and to have quite a number of good NPCs and even good monsters, so that the world is not totally dark and totally dangerous all the time. Um, yeah, I mean, for the most part in the world of Mir, the wilderness is pretty dangerous. The farther you get away from these settlements, it's really dangerous. The underworld is dangerous. Phaland is dangerous. certain cities or and towns are dangerous. So I do like to have some places where the party has a little bit of a breather.
I appreciate that in a game because I like combat, but I'm not it's not my main focus. I like the role playing
Right,
elements and the
right.
and actually looking, I might go down an alleyway just to see what it looks like and how it's described and that kind of
Mhm,
stuff and find little nooks and crannies like that. But um all of these elements are incredibly satisfying for a player because they are if you don't have them you really notice like if you don't have any if there's no life like
mhm,
you want to be in a city uh that's got a bunch of life going on things are happening even though you're there or not and that's kind of the goal for as you described like the Lucas sort of elements where these pieces of life are still going on and some of them you interact with and some of them you never will but at the same time just knowing they're there in the back of your mind those seeds are planted of
mhm,
oh hey I really need to find XYZ or I would really like to go and visit this particular location and hopefully that location is connected to the story that's being told. But again, at the same time, it doesn't necessarily have to be. Or the DM could be like, "Oh, really? You want to go there? Didn't think of that
mhm,
before I was prepping, but yeah, totally go there." And then you could work things in. But um, because you already know, like you said, there's two vampire cities in on Mir, and you know when you're in danger. You know when you go there, it's like, oh, guys, we have to be prepared. We have to be ready. Let's not do anything uh, too rash, but don't die either. But in a general city, I'll call them a general city, an
mhm.
average city, um, you don't necessarily want that. As you said, you want that breather. You want to be able to go in and go, okay, watch your money. But other than that, life is good. And let's go to the pub or let's go to that vendor over there. Let's go to that store. Uh, and yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and
I
we've talked about this balance too of darkness, good and evil too, that I think many times in modern pop culture it's not done properly and it doesn't work. An example I would give is the Sherlock Holmes series from BBC, um, with that guy who everybody likes. Um, it's really good, I think, until the last season. And what happens is they just have too many dark elements. It also reminds me of the new version of Strahd, The Curse of Strahd, where it's just I did that module. It was one of the earlier ones I done. I was the DM for in 5e, and it's super oppressive and grim. And I think there is a limit to that. Like, and the balance is just off. Like it's just like in that location, you're trapped. It's dark all the time. It's misty and I think cold too.
yes, of course.
And yeah, I think some of that is a fun adventure to make your way through, but I think it's helpful to have a balance, you know. Then that helps with your darker characters too, because it outlines them in a more realistic way. You know, if you do have again, I mean, one of the reasons that these cities and towns, you know, they're going to be a bit of a breather for the party usually is that they have to function. If you have that many people living together, and there's an economy there and there's people who are running the place, it's going to have to function to a certain degree. Otherwise, it's going to fall apart. So, you know, for it to be a community, it has to be functioning at a certain kind of level. So when you have that, and then you find out that, oh, even though that's happening, you know, the king is evil, or actually vampire nobles control this place, you know, or this bard is evil, who is very influential. You know, when you have a city that's not totally evil and dark and oppressive, then it kind of it gives that darkness kind of a boundary that makes it more interesting and I think is better storytelling personally. And I think, yeah, I think, you know, I had players tell me with that first Strahd module, like, when are we going to be out of here? And I totally got it. You know, I knew I'd already decided like it was going to be one or two sessions more and we were going to be out because I got that feeling too of like, yeah, we've done it now. Like, I know there's some people who play like in the Ravenloft world, like they play in worlds that are totally grim and dark permanently. Um, yeah, that's not really my thing. I can, you know, and again, there's millions of tables. People can play the way they want, obviously. Um, I like a place where there's more good in the world, and then the good versus evil as a more balanced place. You know, like it's
It's I don't know why this popped into my mind, but a little while ago, maybe sometime last summer, I was playing uh, a mod pack for the game Minecraft, and what you just said uh, just made that come to mind because when I was playing it,
mhm,
the original spawn where you start in the game was a candy cane land. Like there were candy canes and sugar plums and all kinds of things you could like. The world was made of
right,
candy,
right.
but then you walk 2 minutes to one direction and it was this grim, dark, thing where you walk into it and suddenly all the light goes down and you can't see anything. And I thought it's that kind of stuff. Like if you want that kind of environment where you've got those kinds of things that you can go back and forth to,
Mhm,
it can break up that sort of grim stuff. Where yeah, like Strahd always reminded me of. It felt like Gotham City. Like
exactly.
Batman is gonna jump out of the dark, at any point.
Mhm,
But yeah, and I've played. I've whined about the one game I played several years ago, where I tried playing it, but everything was so grim. You didn't know what the story was doing, but you're in dark places. You're not having it, and it just the fun was gone. Like after, like it's okay for a session or two. It's like, oh, we got to
mhm.
get through this, but when you have no light at the end of the tunnel for longer than I don't know 10 hours of gameplay, then forget it. You may as well just dive into a candy cane land and just say, I'm not going back. I'm here. I found this place. I'm out. But yeah, I mean, environment helps create mood, but uh, people can only. It's a game. You don't mind being in the gloom and the evil areas, but you got to know that you're trying to get out of it. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I would say like for me, 10, we usually play 4 hour sessions, most of the groups. For me, 10 sessions in the Underdark in a row or 10 sessions in Barovia. Yeah, that's kind of about enough for me. Because our
yeah,
campaigns are usually 40 sessions or so, usually it takes to get to 20th level. So yeah, maybe a quarter of the campaign max there. That's good. And that would be max. Um, other features you could add for your settlements. You could talk about how unwelcoming or welcoming, like in Skyrim, the one town Riften, it's super
yeah,
unwelcoming. All these rude people all the time, sketchy people. You could talk about how crowded the place is, how maybe it's extremely wealthy. I've got one place in Mir like that I can think of right away. Actually, a couple of places, and then most places are not like that. Um, you could obviously include the weather and then big events that could happen to the city. And we have this in the city book, like an earthquake hits the city or tornado, a flood. So you could have these big events that change what's going on there. So yeah, there's lots of different elements. You know, there's some very basic ones that you would have even in a village. So I would say the very, very basics that you would sketch down would be who rules the place, who guards the place. You know, if it's a village, you might just have one inner tavern, a town, a few more, and then a city, you might have, I think in Mir, the really big cities, some of them might have maybe a dozen taverns and a dozen inns. But again, in a village, you might only have one inner tavern. You might not even have an inn. Um, and then a general store. So that has basic equipment and supplies, maybe dry food, and that, or you could have a
Yeah.
market, and then stables. So those real basic elements, you could make a village just with those, and have a few NPCs, and now you've got a village. You expand on that a bit more, you have a town. Maybe you obviously have a larger guard force. You have maybe more stores. A blacksmith you might not even have in a village, but that's going to be very key. For sure, you're going to have a blacksmith in every town. You're going to have multiple blacksmiths in a city. And the stores, you're going to have, hundreds of stores potentially in a city, but I would make, again, max maybe a dozen. The party, probably is not going to visit more than that. And yeah, I think it's pretty easy to make a village, pretty simple. Town, a little bit more work, and then a city. That's the one that you're going to sit down and write for a while. To have, maybe a dozen inns and taverns, a dozen stores, have some interesting NPCs. Again, maybe a dozen, and then also you can build on these things. When I started Mir, I had one village with a duke, his guard force, his daughter and his wife, a blacksmith, stables, one tavern, no inns. So if someone wanted to have stay somewhere, they had to stay in somebody's house or go camping or go to the next settlement. And there was a wall. There was a wall around this village, and an orc clan had them under siege. And that was the
Oh,
beginning. Yeah.
nice.
And that's all I started with. And now I have 9 continents. Most of which is done now. So, and that'll be hopefully in a book this year.
Excellent. I'm jiving on that because I have the map. I have a
Yeah.
map of it somewhere, and I've often wondered, like, oh, we haven't actually been to this one or this one or this one, and
Yeah.
yeah.
You've been to Mir, the central continent, and Nairn, where the halflings and elves are from. And you've been to Mazan, which I'm going to change, by the way. You've been to Mazan, where the dwarves are from. You've been to Zog, which is the biggest continent where humans began. And oh, you've been to Norvold, which is sort of this northern human settlement. And briefly, you've been to Voth, where these snow elves live. So you've never been to Galen. You've never been, which is sort of, we have a few sort of forest continents. So that's one of those. But it's quite different. You're going to laugh when you see what that's about. Um,
Oh, that's where the Candyland is.
yeah, not exactly. No, it's something new. And then the South has two you've never been to, which is the desert, a huge desert continent, Ginos, and then which is sparsely populated. And then there's the jungle continent of Tyrannos. So yeah, you haven't been to 3 of them at all, but you've been to 6. Yeah.
That kind of excites me because I know there's more to discover,
Oh yeah.
and how many cities and towns are on these continents?
Well, the biggest continent of Zog has about 30 cities, maybe, and about 60 or 70 towns, probably, or
Cool.
60 or 70 towns and villages. Maybe that includes
Okay.
villages. Yeah, Zog is quite big, but none of them are, again, because it's a medieval world, you're talking of places where cities get to max, 50 to 100,000. That would be an enormous city. So most cities are 10, 20, 30,000. So these aren't worlds that are inhabited like here with millions of people, billions of people. Quite different. And again, you need a massive amount of farmland to sustain people in this kind of world.
Well, it's like every time I see Coruscant being shown in any Star Wars, show or movie or
Mhm.
whatever, in the back of my mind, I always wonder, how do they feed everyone? Because
Yeah,
there must be some technology that they have never shown, but it seems like there's like 40 billion people living on a planet. And like,
yeah,
how does that even happen?
yeah,
But
yeah. No, exactly, exactly. It does help. Another thing I do is, when you're going in and out of the city, when you're traveling in the city, it helps the players to see part of that economy, right? So I
yeah,
often have you run into merchants who are moving goods back and forth. They're especially food. Um, and maybe they're moving timber, maybe they're dwarf miners. So I often have that, that part of the world, the party will run into people, participating in that. Um, and again, like you said, I think that helps make the world feel real.
exactly. And those are the elements, as you pointed out, that are crucial to making these things feel alive. And
Mhm.
even if you think it's minuscule, or even if you're putting or putting a city together, um, the example actually of the fishing part, I mean, and having accessible water, that look at any world map of this planet and look through and actually just take note of where most of the cities are. And they're either on an ocean, a river, or an oasis or a spring.
Mhm.
And they're generally not out in the middle of nowhere for zero reason, and because that's where the vampires live. That's
Right.
basically all of Saskatchewan and Alberta. But anyway,
Yeah, I was gonna say that Edmonton, like, yeah, yeah.
well, there go all our Edmonton viewers.
No,
Uh,
that was my first experience in Canada. No, it's amazing that there is a city there, and just in terms of how much money it costs to heat that city. I'm sure like
oh
parts of
yeah,
Russia too, and Sweden and Norway and Finland. You have a place that big. The amount of money it costs to heat it and to clear the snow. It's amazing that there's a city there. It's
it's kind
also
of
like
a
it's an amazing community. Like the best schools and sports programs I ever saw in my life were there.
well. I mean, that is so important. That the and that brings another element uh, of cities and towns in D&D is that just look. Well, we'll use Edmonton as an example. Just look at
Mhm,
what's there,
mhm.
and you can scale it down from however many people live there, which is, well, I feel like it's like a million people, maybe not.
Probably
Uh,
just over 1,000,000 now. Yeah.
so and what kind of services do they need? Like
Mhm,
what kind of if you're a character walking into a town, and hopefully the DM has actually said, okay, this is a town. It's a fishing village. All right, so there's going to be a lot of fish related things, a lot
mhm,
of industry around that, around the ocean or the lake or whatever it might be, and that would just be. It comes back to, it just gives life to these worlds, and as you're running a game, always bring attention to that kind of stuff, because if you read off a little bit of like a paragraph to describe what's going on, that's okay for the first couple of minutes, but after that, you really need to go, oh well, yeah, you've walked into Bizzle Bob's home, and he's not happy you're here because you just kind of walked in. You
mhm.
thought it was the tavern, but no, it's not the tavern. The tavern is two doors over. Uh, so how do you reconcile those kinds of situations? Which that would be so great. How would you get people to open up the wrong door? But anyway, that's for a DM to decide. um, any final words on creating towns or cities?
Again, a really helpful resources to use our Monsters of the City book. We also have some Dungeon Master handbooks on the DM's Guild that give you some really good tables to build cities with, NPCs, events, ready-made events. We have that here in the city book as well. There's a whole bunch of adventure hooks and additional ideas that you could use. So, and there's lots of resources, like you mentioned, Shane, about maps. Go online. There are tons of resources to maps that you can find and you could just use that are ready made, or you can learn to use one of these programs. Some of them are not super intuitive. Some of them take a while to learn. Um, but there's a lot of resources to look for online for building cities and other settlements.
Give a shout out to one of these websites just here really quickly that I've used, just not necessarily for anything I've played, but it's really more or less um, for inspiration about what do I want, what is the feel I want for a particular thing,
Mhm.
and this is called Wata. I call it Wataboo. I'm sure it's not pronounced that way, but basically, this website gives you generators where you can make a map of something, you can make a city, a district of a city. These are mansions, which this is actually one I've not really played with too much, but it's like a
Mhm.
3D mansion, and it gives you kind of an idea of what's inside.
Mhm.
Villages, of course, and dungeons. And all you have to do is, and I'll pick a district, I'll click on it, and then you go into it, and then uh, you are able to generate a town or a region of a town.
Mhm.
And if you right click on it, you can of course give it different things about different sorts of things you want to see and what style it is, and then you can download them, use them for your game, stuff like that. But that's just one of them. That's just the one that I like because it gives me variety of things. And you could just click refresh and reload a new town, a new city, a new world, and you can kind of look and see and get ideas for what you want to build in the game you're putting together.
Yeah,
So
totally.
that
That if you give me that link, I can put it down below. We can
totally
talk
will.
about that after. But that village one, I have about 100 villages saved on my computer from that village generator.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that you don't have to use them right away.
No.
You can go out, use. There's 100 million websites out there that do very similar things, and once you have stuff, if it still looks cool, just save it, come back to it later, and you don't feel pressure that you have to be the best person at creating these kinds of things, because at the end of the day, after all is said and done, and I'm just doing it,
It's
it's just a
just a game.
game. But so, well, thank you all for watching. All of the stuff, of course, will be down in the thing down below. And I certainly hope that you guys have had fun. I certainly have. I have fun every week doing this. And I hope that you have this coming weekend or tonight or tomorrow night, you get into a game and just play along. Or, as we were talking about today, uh, try building something. Try making something cool. Use your imagination to even just for fun. If you're not going to use it, just try it anyway, because I think that there's a lot of things in it that you can little elements of placement of towns, placements of buildings within those towns and stuff like that, and add stories to them, because why not? That's just kind of I do this all the time for fun and giggles. So there you go. That's just me, though. I'm weird. But thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.
Later.